a general scheme to show you the important areas where hyperbaric oxygen has connections to neurosurgery as an adjuvant treatment. And of course, we talked about traumatic brain injury already. This is, but there are connections, some functions that are applied to more than one. For example, neuroprotection, not only for traumatic brain injury, but for post-operative ischemia of the brain. So, and also in case there can be a vascular problem after surgery. Yeah. And I've already mentioned these things. Other connections or indications I would mention now that how it can, by relieving edema, is not just for traumatic brain injury, but also for post-operative. So we have in some time. So sometime after surgery is a problem, post-operative edema, and another problem, post-operative infections. Now, it's not very frequent. Cerebral edema is probably the most of interest in regard to neurosurgery, and not only in head injuries, so in other many neurosurgical conditions, there can be vasogenic edema, that I mean paralysis of the blood vessels with the increased permeability. And the intracranial pressure is the sum of three components: the volume of the brain, the cerebrospinal fluid, and the blood present in the cranial cavity at any time. So, want to reduce swelling, you can aim at any of the three components. The conventional treatment includes steroids, diuretics, hyperventilation, etc., which are really not so effective. Drainage of ventricular fluid and decompressive craniotomy are done, but not very common. But they are they can maybe used as medical measures, not able to handle the swelling. And so how does hyperbaric oxygen affect reduce the cerebral edema? Partly by vasoconstriction, that will reduce the cerebral volume, and also the intracranial pressure. It can also, by increased oxygen tension, reduces hypoxia, which incidentally is causing other problems, including edema, and so it will reduce edema, and by improving these effects of ischemia, again improving oxygenation. And all these things, if you reduce edema, is going to further come back and help in improving the circulation as well as the oxygenation of the brain. So it is sort of an interacting thing, all these factors. And the favorable results in cerebral edema were first used in experimental animals, and the patients with severe brain injuries were the first to be treated. And not only was there reduction of the swelling, but improved metabolism. So it can reduce the cerebral blood flow, but maintain cerebral oxygenation. And hyperbaric oxygenation sort of breaks that cycle, as I mentioned. And one of the important things in neurosurgery, we want to protect the brain. and neuroprotectant is an agent that prevents death of the neuron either by inhibiting one of the steps in the pathological process that follow injury to the nervous system. Some of this we covered before, or if an artery is occluded, then there's hypoxia. And as I mentioned, a number of them are being under investigation in new technologies, but what we have commonly used in neurosurgery is we still use hypothermia, hyperbaric oxygen, and coma induction. And hyperbaric oxygenation can be useful not only in acute TBI, we mentioned acute stroke, also we mentioned already, as well as adjunctive surgery of aneurysms. Not only just before surgery, as I mentioned, making the patient in a better shape to undergo surgery, but sometimes post-op complications occur after aneurysm surgery. You can, for example, develop the vascular impairment and swelling after surgery, and that again would be helped. Incidentally, with the refinement of surgical technique and microsurgery, these complications are very rare now, so it's not a frequent application. Post-operative cellular edema and ischemia is a general thing. It all depends upon the primary condition for which surgery is done, and depends upon the technique and number of things. But if it does occur, we can use it. For this purpose, I don't think many neurosurgeons would routinely use that to improve the post-op course of their patient. This is something that they reserve for some serious situation, more serious situation. And intracranial aneurysms, again, the neurosurgical procedures have improved to a point that we have very, very low mortality, less than 3%, and we have very few complications. But vasoconstriction due to subarachnoid hemorrhage remains a problem. There is no satisfactory treatment yet to undo the narrowed blood vessels that can sometimes disturb the cerebral circulation, and in some cases may involve postponement of surgery till this can improve. And the reduction of postoperative complications in aneurysm surgery have been reported in older series. But as I mentioned, the refinement of techniques, very few patients have these, so there is no big series anywhere for this indication, but it's available if such a situation should arise. Again, post-operative infections, you heard of, again, it has been mentioned already in other presentations. Infections occur in about 2.5% cases, but it varies from center to center. Actually, fortunately, I had very seldom an infection, and so I did not actually ever have to use hyperbaric for post-operative infection. But successful results were achieved, and the biggest series reported so far remains still this one, and they achieved good results in 27 of 36 patients. And the important advantage was that the craniotomy flap could be retained. What happens usually in infection is it never clears up if there is a foreign body there, and the flap of the bone that is almost like separated from the rest of the skull sometimes has to be removed, and later on you have to do repeat surgery to either to reconstruct that. The protocol, but infections have been treated without having to remove this, and that's the big advantage. And the protocols were usually 2.5 ATA for three sessions of 25 minutes each, with some breaks, and up to 40 sessions may be needed, and no complication because these infections were strictly cerebral, and the brain itself, patient had recovered from the surgery, so it's not an acute damage to the brain. So you are aiming higher pressures. You need that much to kill the microorganisms, so that's okay here. So I think it's safe. There are still some neurosurgeons who would take issues with that. They think that they can clean out the wound, give antibiotics, wash it, perhaps not have to remove the bone or any other device that was implanted, metallic pin, in case of spinal surgery. But I still think it's more secure and better to use hyperbaric rather than take a chance on doing any of the other alternatives. And brain abscess, again, I would skip it because yesterday it was already covered in another presentation. And the main advantage was to reduce the amount of antibiotics, duration of hospitalization, and about bactericidal effect, it has mostly on anaerobic, but I think other organisms are susceptible too, because the HBO has synergistic effect with some of the antibiotics that may still be used for the treatment of other microorganisms. And in case there is some edema surrounding the abscess, in the acute stage of the abscess, chronic abscess is practically don't have much swelling around them. So that would be an additional benefit. And I think there are some special sort of protocols. You don't necessarily have to open up and do drainage. Most of the abscesses these days are aspirated by stereotactic procedures. So again, as I mentioned, convenient for giving hyperbaric treatments afterwards. And this is an interesting case on the left. These are amoebic encephalitis, kind of rare to see this infection, but it occurred in a child with lymphoblastic leukemia. And how they resolved following the treatment, and there was a lot of swelling surrounding that with shift, midline shift also came back. So now we're coming to spinal surgery. The spinal procedures for removing tumors or decompressing spinal cord usually have very good results, particularly for benign tumors. But sometimes the recovery is not what we expect and not so prompt, because there are, due to pressure of the lesion, there has been some ischemia of the spinal cord, and in these situations, the hyperbaric oxygen would facilitate the recovery. These are some of the first applications. Incidentally, first uses of hyperbaric neurosurgery were in the early 1970s in the University Neurosurgical Clinic in Bonn, Germany, where patients in the post-operative complications were treated, including those who had benign lesions removed from the spinal cord and had residual neurological deficits, and they showed good results. Incidentally, use has been extended to cervical myelopathy, One of the traditional treatment for neurosurgical care is to decompress. A patient continues to have neurological deficit and it's not improved by conservative management. But cervical myelopathy doesn't always resolve. I am aware of cases also where surgical decompression was done very carefully and the patient did not recover from the neurological deficits. Now, I think we have to establish, is the cervical myelopathy, and this particular case was for very long standing and very severe deficits, is it reversible? That's the question. That can be answered always by trying to see response to preoperative hyperbaric oxygen. Also, if they, apart from that, it may be useful. Let's say that there is residual neurological deficit following decompression, may be worthwhile in those cases to give them hyperbaric treatment to see if they improve. One finds out if there is improvement, they can be continued for a longer period repeated. And again, in the spinal cord will be the same situation. We don't have the abscess like in the brain, but the most common site is epidural. It's outside the dura, but these are also problem cases to get rid of. And you can drain them, and antibiotics are given. The major complication of an extradural abscess, osteomyelitis of the spine, which is kind of a very tricky thing to do. And this is where I think hyperbaric oxygen is very useful. And I've just come across a study that's very intriguing, that patients with cervical spondylosis or muscle atrophy due to anterior horn ischemia, they had not responded to conservative treatment, traction of the cervical spine, but there was improvement in some of these cases following hyperbaric oxygen, including muscle strength. The outcome varied from being excellent or good to, and I think there's some case did not respond. So the explanation for this is that it probably had a beneficial effect on the ischemic injury of the anterior horns, indicating that therapy might be useful treatment as an alternative to surgery. Prior to surgery for patients with ischemic myelopathy, they could still be operated on, but if they are treated before for this myelopathy, they might do much better after surgery for the further improvement. I think we can skip. These are just the MRI scans of this patient. Now, again, the adjunctive radiation therapy of malignant brain tumors, this topic has been discussed. Basic principle, hypoxia and tumor. And HBO can be combined, both radiotherapy and chemotherapy. And there's one consideration, of course, glioblastoma. The problem is not only the delivery of available agents that we have, getting them to the tumor or having them optimal effect on the tumor. The problem is we do not yet have a cure. This is one of the few tumors. So we can prolong life and patients eventually do die. But one has to keep this in mind, although the radiosensitivity can be enhanced. But in all the treatment that have been combined with HBO, survival has increased, but eventually these patients do die. And unfortunately, we have to wait for time when we can find a more cure for this. some of the precautions or the consideration you have to keep in mind is that if you're going to use anti-angiogenic therapy, many of these glioblastomas, and of course we can find it out by MRI scan, have a large angiogenic component. There are a lot of neovascularity that are developing, and in chemotherapy of these, we tend to select agents that would be anti-angiogenic. There are some pretty efficient anti-angiogenic agents which will obliterate the blood vessels, but they will at the same time reduce the efficacy of HBO because it would not get into the interior of the tumor because we have blocked off all the vessels, both large and small. So I think this is an area which requires further research and clinical trials in human patients to evaluate HBO as an adjunct to glioblastoma. In regard to with the availability of more microbiology studies and techniques and biomarkers, F18HX4 is a biomarker of hypoxia in PET imaging. It's been so far used on animal models of cancer. Now, if we can combine treatment nicotinamide and carbogen, combine that we can show the reduction of accumulation of this biomarker, whereas only 40%, but there is 7% oxygen, a 30% increase in uptake. So I think it is like a biomarker that can be used for detection and evaluation of tumor hypoxia. We want to see how much hypoxia there is as an index of how much response we will get from hyperbaric oxygen. So this approach requires testing. It means that before you make a decision, you are going to use HBO as an adjunct to treatment of glioblastoma. We may use a test such as that to find out how much enhancement of the action you will expect. So HBO has certainly a definite place in neurosurgery, and there are so many case studies as well as trials indicating beneficial effect, both acute and chronic sequelae, and also for complications of neurosurgery. And I would say the one area that I didn't go into much detail before, the role of HBO is an acute spinal cord injury. We need further exploration. So I mentioned it now, didn't make this remark in the CNS trauma. Thank you.